Welcome back, everyone. First time, long time. I'm your host, Kyle.
And I'm Stu.
And today we are taking a look at Mirrodin. This is part one of our Hidden Gems segment, where we're going to be looking at our numbers 10 through 6, bottom half of our Hidden Gem picks of this set.
Indeed, we're going to climb through this pyramid and see what lies at the tippy top, but you're going to have to find out next episode to see what the fortune may hold.
Awesome.
And then afterwards, we will go ahead and show our final video, which is the top 10 money cards from this set, which we are not allowed to pick from, which is our picks are totally different from those amazing cards. But regardless, we'll cross this adventure together.
Indeed. So, why don't we just go ahead and get started?
Indeed. I got my card at number 10, Kyle, if you don't mind.
All right, go ahead. Let's not waste any more time. People are dying for this content. Let's get into it.
My first card is a 1-drop artifact called Life Spark Spellbomb. It is, like I said, 1 generic mana and an artifact with 2 separate effects. One of them being a forest. You can go ahead and sacrifice this artifact, and until the end of the turn, target land becomes a 3/3 creature that is still a land, or you can pay 1 generic mana and sacrifice this artifact to draw a card. So these are pretty similar to a whole cycle that we do see the spell bombs going ahead and existing in every color pair.
Yeah.
I like the green one though because it's not something you usually typically see. Like the blue and the black ones are the most famous out of the cycle, but for the fact with green, you usually need a little bit of like card draw, which isn't so bad, but the fact that you can go ahead and hit a land. Now, problem lands are usually an issue in the game. People don't really assume this to be used on an opponent, but that's where this would really shine. You go ahead, you hit someone's Guy's Cradle, Urborg, Cabal Coffers, any kind of problem land. As soon as a board wipe's going off, or to combo with somebody else who's another player at the table, you now have a way to get rid of it with creature removal, which, again, takes a little bit more work, but is an option in your arsenal.
Yeah, that's very fair, because I was going to start this whole thing off by saying, as I usually do, Stu, explain to me why this card isn't terrible.
Well, I think I just did a pretty good job.
You did, really. There you go, see?
Yeah, see, I pressed Kyle, so it's a good start for this episode.
But I love the Spellbomb cycle. There were some, they revisited it in the Scars of Mirrodin set, but I like the original ones better because they didn't have tap abilities and they were a little bit less expensive and they all sort of drew a card or, did a thing, which is cool. I love putting spell abilities on permanents that can be recurred more easily. And the artifact spell bombs are a prime example of that. I never really cared for the green one because it's like, so what? I'm animating a land of mine for a turn. Who cares? But what you said, though, is a very interesting point, that, animating a land to get rid of it more easily. Okay, all right, I'll buy that. And also, just having card draw in a green deck is not a bad thing, of course.
Well, true, but also with this having such a fast sack ability, you don't have to tap for it, which is what you said. If you go ahead and use the effect, someone tries to destroy it in response, you can still pay for the effect again and still get the effect to go off, kind of like what we see with like Sensei's Divining Top.
Exactly, and with green becoming even more artifact friendly in recent sets, maybe there's actually a home for this now.
It could be credible. Yeah. Who knows? But moving on to your number 10, Kyle, what do you got?
Indeed, yes. This is a little bit more complicated here. My number 10 is a really bizarre but cool card called Power Conduit. Now, this is yet another artifact. Get used to it. We're going to be looking at a lot of artifacts. This is Mirrodin.
It is Mirrodin.
It's the original artifact set. But anyway, this is a 2-mana artifact that has a tap ability to remove a counter from a permanent you control and then choose one ability. You can either put a charge counter on target artifact or put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So again, tap ability to remove any counter from anything. Now, you might think the standard value of thinking is like, oh, a +1/+1 counter on a creature or a -1/-1 counter on a creature, but because there are so many different types of counters in this game now, there are loyalty counters on planeswalkers, there are keyword ability counters, there are lore counters, there are level up counters. There's so many kinds of counters.
Well, there are. So before I just cut you off completely, my only gripe is why would you want to get rid of like an indestructible counter or like a vigilance counter for a +1 counter or a charge counter?
Oh, you wouldn't always, but sometimes you might want to, because if you have accumulated several indestructible or like vigilance counters, so like several redundant types of counters on something, you can put them to good use. Also, as I was saying, you can remove planeswalker loyalty counters to buff up your creatures or charge up your artifacts. The charge counter side of this, there are quite a few artifacts out there that use charge counters. And that's not really the selling point here to me. The selling point is being able to pump up your creatures. So in order to like use a planeswalker loyalty ability, is just great, you know, because you can plus the Planeswalker, then you can take those counters off, kind of keep it where it is, or maybe it went up if it's more than +1 ability, and buff up some of your creatures. There are a lot of Planeswalkers that have synergies with +1/+1 counters, so it works really well.
See, I don't think Planeswalkers is the play here. I think, honestly, this works really good with the Sagas that we're seeing in the Kamigawa set.
That's another really good point. They work very well with Sagas.
So being able to make it so you can repeat those over and over again, so they don't either get the Exile flip or get the final one and then get removed from the board. Or actually, another really good point with that is like cumulative upkeep counters, which we see with something like a Glacial
you can
Crevice.
take them off.
Yeah, a Glacial Chasm, I mean.
Yeah.
Or, and there's another thing out there. I mean, you can always obviously tag this with something where it's like, not Thing in the Eye, the other guy, where it's like the land that comes into play.
Dark Depths.
Dark Depths, like this would work with something like that.
So this is less about what you get from removing the counter. It's more about removing the counter. There are actually very few permanents that just remove counters like this. There's Vampire Hexmage, there's Hex Parasite, there's
it's
the
limited.
one legendary blue guy, but that's really about it. There's very little of this kind of ability.
Solemnity is a really good one for that, but again, it's just blanket removal.
Right.
But if you are doing a Saga deck, and I really do like this for like a Saga deck, and I get what you're saying with the Planeswalker, you could be tricky. Somebody goes in and attacks, you block as a chump, you do something to boost it, now you trade out a creature instead of just losing a creature.
Right, exactly.
It makes it a little bit more of a problem. And honestly, I don't think I would waste a removal spell for this if it's not, like, again, something that's caring about cumulative upkeep counter removal or Saga continuations. Like,
another interesting one you could do is that altar, the necromantic altar, I want to say, but the one where you can pay 3 life, put your commander from
Netherborn altar.
Netherborn altar.
Not very often I get a card you don't, so
true.
yeah.
But
I'll
so
take
that
it.
one, you don't have to pay as much life. But anyway, there are a lot of potential applications for this card, and that's why it's on my list, basically.
I think it actually might be a hidden gem for Sagas. But moving on off of that.
So what's your next one, then?
My number 9 is a card probably nobody's seen. It's a card called Mirror Golem. It costs 6 generic mana for a golem with a 3/4 body. It has the imprint ability, which means when it enters the battlefield, you may remove a target card in a graveyard from the game. It can be any graveyard, which is great. And then this creature will get protection from each imprinted card type. So this is really interesting because we don't see a lot of protection in the game. It was an old word ability that they didn't realize it was super strong back in the day. Like, true name Nemesis is probably more of the poster child of protection that we see out of anyone else in the game. But being able to go ahead and grave hate a player and then make it so you have a creature out there that's going ahead and making it so that they are kind of unaffected by some of their stuff is really powerful because it's going to be a silver bullet to certain decks. You're playing a Spellslinger deck, you hit instants from that grave. Okay, this has protection from instants. Somebody's super creature heavy, hit the creatures, hit planeswalkers. Like, you can make it so this guy can be adaptable to what you want it to be. And if you use a blink deck, like we usually see like Duplicant, which is good for on the field, this would kind of be its cousin or brother, where it's going to be the same kind of style, but more or less from the grave.
I pride myself on being like extremely knowledgeable about this game and like knowing what all the cards are and what they do. But I'm always surprised. I always find one that I'm like, wow, I didn't even realize it was a thing. Since Golem Tribal is actually becoming a legitimate thing these days,
it's getting a lot of support.
I did not know this card existed. I was like, wow, really? I mean, the 3/4 body for 6 mana isn't really that great.
No.
However,
but that's not the point you want.
Grave Hate is okay. That's not too bad. And then the protection actually can be somewhat relevant. I mean, the most obvious thing would be protection from creatures, and it can just not be blocked all day. So that's fine, but there are a lot of other applications for this too, honestly.
Well, actually, the funny thing is, like, you could still hit a land, and if somebody's kind of mazed at ithing you, and that's an issue, this would get around that.
Hilariously, it might actually, yeah.
And that's what I love about it. It is super adaptable, which, again, you don't really find. And I mean, outside of a blink deck, this might not get that kind of recurability, but in artifact decks where you get a lot of sacrifice, recurrent from the grave if you're in red or black or anything else, or even blue, like, it's got that versatility that you just want to see on a card, and I just can't get enough of this. Like,
and if you're seriously into like Golem Tribal, this actually isn't that bad, so go for it.
Yeah, it's better than some of the other ones we've seen. And then add a Splicer in there, give it some keyword effect, sure.
Yeah, exactly.
But moving on to your number 9, Kyle, what do you got?
Indeed, so yet another artifact. Okay, we're getting on the artifact train here. Number 9 for me is Sculpting Steel.
Trains are artifacts.
A lot of people probably know this one. This is not so much a hidden gem. It is at this point just because it used to be extremely expensive, but now it's not anymore. It's been reprinted a half a dozen times. But it is a 3-mana artifact, really does nothing except for the fact that when it comes into play, you can choose any artifact in play. If you do, Sculpting Steel comes into play as a copy of that artifact. So, artifact clone, right? So
Pretty much,
just,
yeah.
It's not a creature, but it can become an artifact creature. It can become any artifact, not just yours, anyone's. For 3 mana, that's a pretty good deal. A lot of the time, you see this card either copying a really good artifact creature for inexpensive amount, or it can copy a really good equipment. That's where I see most of this, mostly in equipment decks. Because you just want, do you want to copy your best equipment? Absolutely you do.
Yeah,
so
I mean, there are other
equipments
that can be. There is the one that's like a 1-drop, what is it, Metalworker?
Masterwork of Ingenuity.
Masterwork of Ingenuity, sure. But like again, this is really good if you're, again, on an artifact synergy train, you want to go ahead and make it so you can use 2 copies of a card, or if somebody's got a very powerful card, like, I don't know, Bolas' Citadel has become a huge problem. Aetherflux Reservoir is also a card in the game that is very powerful as well.
Yeah, and hey, you can have one too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, why not? And also with the new Kamigawa set, like we said, almost everything is an artifact creature now. And it looks like Phyrexians are on the rise, so we're going to see even more. This could be another good copy for that. Considering back in the day, clones were only targeting creatures, it was, again, unusual to see something that was aiming for another permanent type.
Yeah, so Phyrexian Metamorph is honestly better than this because it can also copy any creature in addition to any artifact.
Sure.
But this is still a really, really solid include.
But you are limited to blue in that regard, where this can go into any deck.
Very true.
But moving on to my card, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So at my number 8, we have a card probably someone's seen going through like a bucket of cards, but has never really given a serious look at, is Synod Sanctum. It is a 1-drop artifact, 1 generic, and it has 2 effects. You can either tap 2 mana and tap it to exile target permanent you control, or tap 2 and sacrifice this and return all cards exiled with this card to the battlefield under your control. So this is pretty interesting because it's kind of like a Blink deck style, but this doesn't have a color identity towards it. And the thing is this works with permanents you control, but the thing that's really interesting about this card is usually when the cards go to exile and they come back, it's under its owner's control. It's under your control. So if you go ahead and you steal something, you can go ahead and keep it by doing this. So if it's something like, I don't know, a Zealous Conscripts that you have, you go ahead and you take something for the end of the turn, or the Primordial, I can never remember his first name.
There are a lot of them.
Yeah, but the Wren the one that pretty much has a group effect to go ahead and like grab creatures and stuff like this. This is something you can go ahead and make it so you can keep the card for later. And it's useful because some colors would really love that effect, and you really don't get it outside of Bance or a blue-white. So it's like, well, how can I get that abusability? It's like, well, this card, this seemingly no big deal card, is kind of that answer.
Well, the thing that I like about this card is, well, not only can it come out very early and start doing its thing very early, which is great, the ability to exile a permanent you control, that's tap ability, but the sacrifice to bring them back is not.
Yes.
So a lot of similar cards I've seen get hurt by the fact that you can only use one of those abilities in a single turn, but this one not at all true. And like you said, probably the biggest selling point of this for me, not necessarily something I might use, but the thing that makes it the most valuable is the fact that you can permanently take control of other people's things. That's very, very good.
Yeah, and also for the fact that this, as long as it's on the field, it disincentivizes people to go ahead and target your stuff for destroy effects. Like, all right, they have an Aura Shards out. Sure, they can go ahead and destroy, well, I guess that's a bad example because this is an artifact, but if they had something out there like...
something that destroys creatures,
like a Lethal Vapors or something like that, or where it's like, or they have a whole bunch of kill spells that they're going ahead and using routinely over and over again.
You can use it as protection and then get your creatures back later. Especially, you can save at least one of your creatures from getting board wiped.
Planeswalkers, enchantments, lands, it's all great. So just, again, card, I've seen so many people have it in their trade binder, like a foil.
I know, I do.
No, well, I didn't even realize that, but yeah. But like legit, no one has ever really used it on the board, and I feel like it has that explosive
cool
potential.
Though, yeah. Moving right along here, I will go to my number 8 here. This is an equipment, actually. It's called Mask of Memory.
Oh, I know this
card. I love
card.
this card.
Yeah.
Straight up love it. It is a 2-mana equipment, equips for 1, and whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, I may draw 2 cards, and if you do, discard a card from your hand. So, For the low price of essentially 3 mana, really, you can give a creature consistently the ability to net you card advantage. It's not just draw 1 card and discard 1 card. It's draw 2 cards and discard 1 card. And for such a low equipment cost that can come out so early on an aggressive creature, that's really good, especially because most equipment decks are in colors that desperately need this kind of card advantage.
Yeah, well, I mean, you usually do see this in something like blue, which, again, can draw cards at the very low price of mana. But it is really good for what it does, because in green, you're like, well, I have to deal damage to a player. There's trample there. In black, you have flyers. In white, you can go wide or put it on something that is sort of evasive. Like, you get the option with it. But, like, also with rogues being in the game, and there are creatures that are unblockable, and there's combat tricks to make it so that things are unblockable. Like, what is it, Tetsuko Umazaki or whatever?
Umazawa, yeah.
Yeah, she didn't make My Neighbor Totoro. My mistake. But like being able to make it so like there are some invasive creatures that you do have or whatever, throwing this on them makes it so that you can go ahead and get card advantage when you need it.
Yeah, unlike most equipments that give a stat boost, this does not. But like I said, the card advantage of basically drawing, I mean, sometimes discarding a card is even better than just drawing cards.
It depends on your
drawing
strategy.
2 cards every time you connect with this, that's really good for an investment that just kind of stays the same every turn, you know?
Comparatively, this to like a Skull Clamp, it depends on what your deck is, because it's like, are you trying to go for more creatures in the grave or sack triggers and stuff like this, or are you trying to go ahead and get piercing? Like, I'd say it's comparable to how it goes with the card draw advantage, and I agree with you with that. This is decent.
I don't know. Skull Clamp is way better than like a lot of cards we could name, but yeah, this is a pretty cool card.
But if it had to be like a tamed version of a Skull Clamp, I think it'd be something closer to this.
Probably so. Yeah. All right. Well, what's your next card?
So my number 7 is a card that just tickles me pink. It is called Goblin Charbelcher, and I think some people have seen this. It was reprinted later on in the sets with different art. It is a 4-drop artifact, and for
Belcher.
And for 3 mana, you can go ahead and tap this, and you will reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a land card, and then this artifact will go ahead and deal damage up to the number of non-land cards revealed this way to target creature or player. If the revealed card is a mountain, it deals double the damage instead, and then you put the revealed cards on the bottom of the library in any order.
This may not be, this is one of those cards that may not be, you know, maybe a not so hidden gem, because this card is actually, despite the fact that it's cheap, is extremely popular in a lot of competitive formats because it is a legit way to win the game. Yes.
This is news to me. I have no idea about any of this.
But it's true. Yeah. No, Charbelcher is an extremely legit way to win the game. And most often by building a 60-card deck with 1 land in it. All you have to do is play this thing out, activate it once, and you basically win the game.
I'm guessing you would be using like mana rocks and stuff like that
use,
too.
Yes, like 0 mana rocks, the Simian Spirit Guides and the Elvish Spirit Guides like cheat this thing out as soon as possible. And then all you have to do is tap it once and you basically win the game. Because you'll mill your entire deck, no lands,
Well, you won't mill, but
you know what I mean.
Well, I wasn't thinking anything like that. I just thought this was good recurable value. That's honestly just fun. Like my first deck I ever had, it was every card I possibly possessed in Progenitus, and it's like, let's just see what happens here because I kind of need recurable spot removal, and this is potentially, I can't talk. It is potentially great spot removal depending on what your opponent has. If they have something little, you can pop that. It might not have been the problem permanent, but it's still getting rid of part of their board and it's throwing off their tempo. Or just hit them in the face. Sometimes it takes revealing 5 cards and then a mountain, you're like, that creature's a problem, but 10 to the face?
Yeah, but you are thinking too small, my friend. Imagine
I am in this regard.
Those modal double-faced lands from Zendikar Rising. Remember, there is a deck that exists that basically plays all of those and no lands because they are lands and also spells. Think about how that interacts with Goblin Charbelcher.
That actually is a good point. I did not even think about that, and I'm kind of glad you told me about it now.
Yeah, I know.
I might change one of my decks around right now for this.
Hey, I haven't seen somebody use a Belcher-style commander deck, but it's possible. Do it. I want to see it.
Yeah, actually, please let us know in the comments how you would do something like that. And also, if you're finding any cards here that you're like, I like this card, I'm glad you brought it to my attention, didn't know about before, let us know in the comments or give us a subscribe or like. We'd appreciate it. But moving on to your number 7, Kyle.
Right,
now, I've seen this card. I've hated this card.
From crushing games to crushing souls. Let's go. This is just one of those horrifying cards you hope you never have to deal with. Number 7 for me is World Slayer. Another equipment here. This one is 5 mana with an equip of 5, so it's quite a bit pricier. Whenever the equipped creature does combat damage to a player, destroy all permanents other than World Slayer. Yes, you heard that right. All permanents, including lands.
Yeah, and that's the part that makes this card really shine for one commander in particular, and that is Zurgo Helmsmasher.
That is mostly where you see this, but there are actually a lot more options nowadays for indestructible commanders. And
with the gods that we've
and
now
just
seen.
indestructible creatures. But yeah, the whole point of this card essentially is to equip it to an indestructible creature, connect with someone, blow up everything other than your creature, and then you basically win the game.
Yeah, because without having lands, you're not casting anything, and you're also not having fun.
It also doesn't have a stat. It doesn't give a stat boost, but does it really need to with an ability like that? No, it doesn't.
It just, I mean, again, it has to be to a player, which is the only saving
it can be
caveat.
challenging. It can be a little challenging sometimes.
Yeah, but again, you have Rogue's Passage, you have a whole bunch of creatures that are on their own unblockable, so it's like you could get that thing to deal the damage, and then whatever's indestructible still live, and there are ways to make it so your stuff is indestructible. Heroic Intervention.
Boros Charm. Just think about that. Hitting somebody with this and then casting a Boros Charm. So everything you have lives while everything everyone else has dies.
Heroic Intervention. I mean, if you want to even go fun, you can go for like the Soul of New Phyrexia in the grave kind of thing. Just pay 5. Everything you have is indestructible.
But I had to name this card because it's a win condition, and it's one of those that, even though it can be like soul crushing to have to deal with this, it's one of those win conditions like it takes so much that goes into it, and it doesn't really come as a surprise most of the time. You gotta respect that. I mean, you know, it's an equipment that just wins you the game. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I'm done talking about this card. I don't know if you are or not. But...
Nah, I'm fine. You go ahead.
All right, so moving on to my number 6, and this will be my last card for this video here. We are looking at a card called Nim Shambler. Now, this is a 4-drop. This is like one of the first cards we're talking about that's not colorless. It is 2 generic and double black for a zombie with a 2/1 body. Now, Nim Shambler gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control, which is nice, but the real saving grace about this card is if you go ahead and you sacrifice a creature, you can go ahead and regenerate Nim Shambler.
All right, well, I'm going to have to stop you right there and say the thing that I usually say, which is, Stu, explain to me why this card isn't terrible.
Really? I thought you were going to say, like, oh, this is one that like goes Goblin Charbelcher, didn't realize it was used in
there are a lot of Nims that are actually decent, but this one, why this one in particular?
Okay, so this one in particular, so the reason being is a lot of things that we like to use as sack outlets usually end up getting hit for spot removal because they themselves are dangerous. Now, sure, this is limited to the regeneration shield, which we then learned from Spiny Starfish. Thank you guys for correcting us on the rules. We did not realize it could just be done over and over again.
Such a shame.
So the rule for the regeneration shield is you sacrifice something, it gets a shield, and then once the shield is gone, you can use the cost again to then create another shield. But so the thing is like, all right, you're going ahead, you're getting some sort of sack outlet with this guy. It may be slower, it could be fast, you choose however that's going at the game speed. But the thing is, those cards are always hated and targeted. It's kind of hard to destroy a creature who's a sack outlet that then can protect itself from the target that's coming at it. So it's kind of like what we saw with, like, you know, Sensei's Divining Top. Sure, this is a problem, I'm going to target it. Well, just because you target it doesn't mean it's going to get rid of the problem. And you find that with Nim Shambler. Also, with it being the zombie, you get tons of different kinds of boosts and anthems and recurability and synergies, and there's tons and tons of commanders that love zombies just because they're zombies.
Right, and the fact that this gang gets +1/+0 for every artifact you control, like we see with like a cranial plating type of thing, that can get scary powerful really quickly.
Yeah, and again, you could just run a filth and swamp walk this thing in. So it seemed just totally off the grid for its actual power because, again, how are you getting rid of this? You have to exile it or bounce it to the hand. As long as they have creatures out there, and if it's black with zombies and some sort of grave pack strategy, they're going to have creatures on the field. Like,
that's true. Free sack outlets are always interesting to consider, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
So did I sway you?
A little bit, maybe. Yeah, maybe a little.
Your voice got real high. I don't trust you for a second. All right, what do you got for number 6, Kyle?
All right, well, for my last card, again, a pretty recognizable card here, but I had to pick it. Duplicant. Going back to the colorless artifacts once again.
An old school favorite to most.
Yes, and again, this was actually a very pricey card up until a couple years ago when it started getting reprinted a bunch of times. But this is the original version. So, 2/4 for 6 mana, an artifact creature shapeshifter. When it enters the battlefield, you can exile target non-token creature and as long as the creature that got exiled is then imprinted on Duplicant, as long as it is imprinted, Duplicant has that card's creature types, power, and toughness, but it is still a shapeshifter.
See, I didn't realize you chose this one because I literally was mentioning Duplicant for my Golem, so that's actually kind of funny here.
Well, it's another one of those imprint cards. I mean, nobody really pays attention to that keyword at that point, though.
Ooh,
It's really, it's really one of those keywords that's extremely forgettable.
There's a money card that actually really shines on this. We're not going to talk about this yet. You can see that in the episode.
Yeah, but I mean, it's pretty pricey for 6 mana, but for a colorless creature that can go in any deck that is just instant exile removal, that's pretty much final for any threat out there, that then steals its power and toughness. That's actually really, really good when you think about it.
It is, unless you're hitting some sort of little tiny creature. It's like I paid 6 mana to now get a 2/2. Like I'm sure the target you're hitting is worth the exile hit.
I hope so.
But then you're like, I'd love to hit like a Blightsteel or a Crater Hoof or an Eldrazi Titan.
But it does suck when you have to get rid of like a 2/2 that's really good, and then this is stuck being a 6 mana 2/2.
Yeah.
But when you can start blinking this, like a lot of other cards, it gets oppressive and horrible very quickly.
Braga would love this. Rune would love this. I mean, and there's
almost, like I said, I stick this, and I consider sticking this in almost every deck I build, just because unconditional removal that doesn't care about colors is just really good.
Yeah,
it's so solid.
It pretty much is a 6 mana exile target creature, which, again, in some colors is not worth that cost, but
in others it is.
It is. Green, who doesn't really have a lot of kill creature effects.
Yeah.
This is great.
This is mostly at home in red, though, because red can recur artifacts extremely easily and also does have that dearth of like good removal.
Yeah,
so.
Feldon loves this. You can go ahead and put this on like with Duretti.
Right.
Or
exactly.
Duretti,
yeah.
Yeah.
Get them confused.
You can never get those right.
However, one thing to note about Duplicant is the fact that they've errated it since, as this version of the card says, exile target non-token creature. The fact that it can't hit tokens actually does end up being a problem sometimes.
I can see that.
So you gotta be careful.
Yeah, well, what is it? There's the new commander coming from Kamigawa who makes the frog, and the frog's the issue, not exactly the commander. Yeah. So that would kind of be a gripe there, but whatever.
But it's just interesting. It has kind of screwed me a couple of times, but
actually I didn't realize that. But that's a good Oracle call out right there. But that is going to conclude our part 1 of our Hidden Gem set. Now again, these are cards that aren't in the money, and we aren't allowed to choose those. So let us know what you think of these. Are these in your decks? Do you think there's a home for them? And do you think we're completely wrong about some of these cards? That's totally fair,
I mean, I guess we might be. It's all up to you. But yes, rate, like, subscribe to us. We're on all kinds of channels. We can find us on Reddit. We got some of our deck lists on Tapped Out. We're on Facebook and Twitter. You can find them all at the handle TheCardPool.
And until then, I'm Stu.
I'm Kyle, and we'll see you next time at TheCardPool. It's good to be back,
You were gone?
Oh yeah, just for a little while.